You know, every week, millions of us watch our kids run out onto a sports field. It looks perfectly green, it looks totally safe. But what if the biggest challenge our young athletes are up against isn't the other team, but the actual ground they're playing on? Yeah, there's a hidden truth right there under their cleats. And today, we're going to dig it up. So let's just get right into it. For most schools, for local clubs, synthetic fields, well, they seem like a no-brainer, right? They don't need a lot of maintenance. You can use them constantly, rain or shine. I mean, on paper, it really does look like the most logical, perfect choice for our kids. Okay, but hold on. This is where the story takes a pretty serious turn. This number, 58%, it comes from studies on high school athletes. And what it represents is the increased chance of getting injured on synthetic turf compared to good old natural grass. 58%. That's not a small number. It kind of forces us to ask a tough question. Is the logical choice actually the safest one? So, to really understand why these injuries are happening, we have to start by looking at the athletes themselves. We're talking about bodies that are still growing, and that process of growing creates this unique set of hidden risks that we really need to unpack. Here's the first thing you have to get your head around. A kid is not just a little adult. It doesn't work that way. During those big growth spurts, their bones often get longer faster than their muscles and tendons can keep up. And what does that do? It creates this constant natural tension, a pulling force right where those muscles attach to the bone. And those exact attachment points, they're incredibly vulnerable. They're called growth plates or physi. Just think of them as these soft, cartilagey areas at the ends of bones that just haven't hardened into mature bone yet. And because they're softer, they are way, way weaker, making them super susceptible to damage from all that repeated stress, like running and jumping on a hard surface. And what's fascinating here is how the risk actually changes as a kid gets older. Look at this. Between ages 5 and 10, it's all about their cartilage being vulnerable. Then you jump to the 11 to 14 age group, and bam, you see these specific overuse injuries pop up, like Sever's disease in the heel or Osgood-Schwatter in the knee. These aren't just random growing pains. They are literally inflammations of those exact growth plates we were just talking about. And finally, as they get older, the stress moves to the ligaments, and you see this scary spike in serious injuries like ACL tears. Okay, so we've established we have a vulnerable athlete. Now let's turn our attention to the surfaces they're playing on. We're going to put 3 common types of fields under the microscope, and each one has its own hidden danger. First up, the brand new fancy synthetic field. You'd think this would be the absolute safest, but it has this problem that our bodies can feel. We can call it a dry bounce. See, the rubber infill returns energy almost instantly, so instead of cushioning the impact, it kind of acts like a hard trampoline, sending this sharp jolt of force right back up into the athlete's joints. Now, to measure this stuff, we use a metric called Gmax. It's basically just a measure of how hard a surface is, how quickly you stop when you hit it. A low Gmax means a nice, soft landing. The surface is absorbing the shock. A high Gmax means a hard, jarring impact. So the key takeaway is simple. A higher Gmax value means more shock for the body, period. And that leads us directly to the scenario that is probably the most common one out there, the old, worn-out synthetic field. After years of use, sun, rain, all that rubber and sand infill gets squished down, it gets compacted, and the field that was once pretty cushioned becomes harder and harder and harder, almost like playing on concrete. This table right here shows you exactly what happens over time. A brand new field might have a nice, safe Gmax, somewhere between 70 and 85. But look, after just 5 years, that number can climb all the way to 130. And once you get over 150, we're talking about a critical risk of serious injury. The field is literally getting more dangerous every single season. All right, the third danger is a little more sneaky. This one comes from certain types of hybrid fields. The ones that are a mix of natural grass and synthetic fibers. If the synthetic part, the backing, is a rigid mat with a bunch of holes in it, it creates a hidden trap. So here's how this clamping effect works. As players run around, their feet pounding the ground creates vibrations, and that pushes sand down into the little holes in that rigid backing. Well, the sand gets stuck in there. It literally chokes the grass roots, pinning them against hard plastic. The whole system just locks up, turning what should be a nice, flexible surface into a rigid slab that actually gets harder as the game goes on. So now, let's bring it all together. You take a young athlete who is physically vulnerable, right? open growth plates, still developing muscles, and you put them on a surface that is actively getting harder and working against their body. That right there is the perfect storm for an injury. And here is the great and honestly kind of crazy paradox in all of this. Professional teams, they might use their fields for maybe, 12 to 15 hours a week? But a typical youth field, it can see 30 hours of use or more. Think about that. So the very fields that degrade the fastest and get the hardest are being used the most by the very athletes who are the least physically equipped to handle that kind of impact. This statement really just says it all, doesn't it? We are putting the most biomechanically unprotected players, our kids, on the most rigid and least shock-absorbing surfaces available. I mean, when you put it like that, it's pretty clear that something is fundamentally wrong with this picture. But look, just pointing out the problem is only half the job. We need to talk about solutions. And the good news is, geotechnical science has actually evolved to tackle these exact safety concerns. Let's just look at the data for a second. This table compares 3 different systems. What I want you to focus on is that last column, the pressure. That's what the athlete's body actually feels. Notice the rigid hybrid system down at the bottom, a staggering 459 kilopascals of pressure. Now look up at the top, at the bionic hybrid system called Powergrass. The pressure is just 229 kilopascals. That's less than half the impact stress on a young athlete's joints, all because of how it's designed to spread that force out. So why is it safer? Well, for one, it keeps that Gmax value stable and low, right in that ideal 70 to 85 sweet spot. Its backing is elastic, which is specifically designed to stop that sand clamping we saw earlier. It basically dissipates the energy from an impact, shielding the joints instead of shocking them. It's truly engineered from the ground up to provide the protection that growing athletes desperately need. And all of this leaves us with one final question. A question for every parent, every coach, every club manager out there. When we choose a playing surface, are we just looking at a line on a budget, something to be cut, or are we making a serious, long-term investment in the health and the safety of our next generation of athletes? Because the ground they play on, it matters a whole lot more than we ever thought.